Okay, so we've seen a lot from Brad Frost today, and I as well was a little bit influenced by Brad Frost. So I was reading my Twitter feed a few months ago, and I bumped into this tweet where basically Brad says that design systems are 80 to 90% people's stuff, and only about 10 to 20% designs and tools and etc. Which to me is quite sad because I'm more on the tooling side. So I wanted to discover what exactly did he mean by this people stuff. And there was a reply that was kind of interesting for me. And in this reply, Alex says that the design system is a language. And if people are not speaking the same language, then there will be nothing but confusion. And we need to make sure that the design system speaks to both technical and non-technical people. And this last bit really spoke to me. And so I kind of went on this journey to find what kind of common language is this that can speak to non-technical and also technical people. So this is my journey today that I want to share with you. So I'm Bernardo. I work at Travel Republic, like Gina said, and that's where you can find me on Twitter. So Robin, in March, tweeted this exact outline of my talk. Like, he obviously didn't know that I was going to be here. I didn't know that I was going to be here. But this is the exact outline that I'm going to be approaching today with my talk. So we're going to start with a journey through the documentation. Then we're going to go a little bit more into the code in design systems. And we're going to finish up with the relationships around design systems. So let's start with the documentation. So documentation is something that obviously everyone is kind of involved with when you're working with a design system. But this conversation around design systems, and especially around documentation, started a long time ago. And this is just an example. This is the first time that Apple published their human interface guidelines. This was in 1986. And they published this with the intent of helping people to kind of understand how to develop and design for their Apple II and Macintosh computer. Yeah, exactly. So you might not think of this as a design system, but this was actually serving a purpose that is really connected with what we understand as a design system today. And the most fascinating bit to me, this is just a small summary of the chapters that you can find inside this book. And you can have things like general design principles, you have strategy for programming, you also have designing for disabled people, and lots of other elements that we can find today in our design systems. And the saddest thing to me is also that this is almost 35 years old, and we're still struggling to get things like accessibility into our design systems. And obviously people have been thinking about this for a long time. So we've mentioned this, we've mentioned atomic design, and we're kind of fast-forwarding to the last few years. Obviously, as Brad Frost was working on this methodology, it kind of followed the rise of the component-driven development tools. So we had React, we had Vue, we had Angular that kind of raised, in terms of the technology side, this notion of components. So And I think it was Miranda that mentioned the pattern libraries this morning and the component libraries. This kind of this journey into finding the component libraries and building the design systems kind of led into this component libraries. But the component libraries themselves weren't enough. Like we were finding that we needed to add something more to the component libraries because people needed to understand how to use it. So we kind of moved into the documentation of those component libraries. And as Mark says, and he's quite funny on Twitter, so you should definitely follow him. But as Mark says, we've kind of felt the need to bring the code and the design concepts that we had and bring them into a documentation. So, like I said before, this kind of component-driven development, you find this matrix online as well. So there's a lot of tooling that kind of came around at this time, and some of these tools I'll be talking about this today. But specifically, and you can see like on the bottom right corner, it's all about the documentation. So you probably use something like React Style Guidist, DocZ, Storybook, but you also have products coming from companies that are building around this. So you have Envision Design Manager, you have Zero Height, who is sponsoring this event as well. So at this time, we had a lot of tooling to kind of drive the conversation and build this new place so that people could go to see what exactly the components that we had in our systems. But again, as Mark says, the documentation is not the design system, and I think we quickly realized that having just a documentation website wasn't enough. Like, people weren't just getting there, and we had to do something else to kind of drive the adoption of our design systems. So we kind of changed to a different approach. With this approach, we kind of looked to the same components that we already had in our system, in our component libraries, and we thought maybe we can use them to be a very important part of our design systems. So this is a survey by Smashing Magazine, and they basically asked if your design system or style guide, whatever, was still up to date today. And the reality is that it's only like 31% of the people that replied said that it was actually updated. The rest of them said they were either outdated, or even, like, I think 25% just have given up on that. And I think that's a real challenge that we have today, because design systems, yes, we've talked about like getting the buy-in, etc. But the reality is that some of them, or even most of them, is quite challenging to keep them up to date as the design system evolves. So to tackle this, we kind of went into two different approaches. So the first one is code in design tools. So code in design tools is quite interesting, because we thought about picking up the components that we had in code and using them inside our design tools. So this is an exploration from John Gold at Airbnb, where you can see that they are using code on the left side to generate their components, their prototypes. This is Sketch. You can't see the top bar, but this is Sketch. So they are using the code to actually build and render inside Sketch without having to use even libraries inside Sketch. But this approach was also kind of taken to the next step by Seek. So Seek is an Australian company, and you've seen Mark from Seek before. And with Seek, at Seek, they basically also use code and a different tool to. You can see on the left side, you can see that they have all the specification of their design tokens of their components, and they kind of translated that into the actual libraries on Sketch. And this is, I think, it has improved a lot of the process at Seek, but they actually went a little bit further and tried a different approach. And I'm going to talk about this just now, because the problem that they kind of understood from this approach is that they were still using Sketch to work and to design, but obviously their customers are not going to access their website or their apps on Sketch. So they needed something that was actually built on the medium that they were serving their design system. So a new kind of approach also evolved from that, which is designing in code. And we had earlier Laura talking about the importance of designers knowing how to code. But this approach with designing in code completely removes the design tools. So you basically start designing in code. And let me just explain what that can mean. So this is Jonathan Scales. He worked at Stripe. And he's just sharing that at Stripe they have this kind of playground that they can use where they share their design prototypes, but they actually use code. And I have like a a bigger version. So they actually use code on the left, and that generates the prototype. So they can quickly sketch some of the ideas that they have, while actually using the design, the elements and the components that are part of the design system. And we can actually use this today, because once again, and I was mentioning SIG before, they kind of went to a different approach. So they realized that designing in Sketch wasn't enough, so they built this project, so it's called Playroom, where they kind of moved the design process to this tool. And instead of spending time designing in Sketch or Figma or whatever other design tool, they kind of moved the process to a tool like this. This is a playground that you can see that not only has the possibility of previewing the components that you have in your system, but it also caters for different viewports and also different brands that you can see here. So I'm not going to be spending more time on this. There's an awesome talk by Mark Douglas. So he was talking about Playroom. Please watch this talk if you're interested about this approach. But what I want to talk about what I want to talk about today is that he has a very good point when it says that the more advanced that the design system gets, the harder it is to make it work in a static design tool. Because components have much more than the visual aspect. They have the behaviors, they have the interactions. That it's quite hard to illustrate that behavior in a static design tool, obviously. So they kind of push the consumers, and that includes design, obviously, to kind of try a new way of making this design work, this design process work, but using different tools. But the problem is that, obviously, yes, it's a different approach, but it also requires some technical knowledge or at least I think it has the risk of becoming too technical and kind of alienating the people that you are actually trying to convince to start using your design system. So it kind of I kind of go into the last point of this talk, which is about the relationships. As Natalia says here, a design system is how you collaborate and how you communicate between teams and disciplines. And I think that's very important, and it's something that we often forget about, the importance of the design system across different teams. But the problem is that once you start communicating with other people, we get challenges from everyone in the company. So you get from designers that they find the design system too restrictive. You find from developers that just when we have something that is missing, it's just like, oh, I'm not using this. And you also have from managers that just don't understand the iteration and kind of the benefits of using the design system in line with an evolution of a UI and a brand as well. So relationships are based in trust and being present. So I think that for our design systems, we need to build this relationship as well. And the way that you build trust is kind of going back to what I was saying in terms of keeping your system up to date. That's how you build trust, because if the people are using the system, they realize, oh, no, that's not the new version anymore. Then they kind of lose the trust on that system. And the same thing about being present, because if we don't see how the actual users of our system are using the system, then we kind of lose, because I think we need to be as much integrated into the process of everyone in the company as possible. And that's the way that we can lead to the adoption of the design system. So I did this survey in preparation for this talk, where I was asking, and I think this can be kind of a health metric for your design system. And I was asking if you update a critical part of your system, let's say like a brand color, how much manual effort exists to update all the different parts of the design system? And the reality is that only 23% kind of reply that they have an automated process. Pretty much everyone else has to do some manual work, and like 41% said that everything needs to be manually updated. But even having the design system fully automated can lead to problems, because we can have the design system being the source of failure, the point of failure of our entire organization, because if the wrong change gets in and it's automatically merged into the code, then we have problems. So the way that we can deal with that is to make the design systems more open. We need to make them more accessible to everyone in our organization, and we need them to be more human, to be actually catering for the problems of the people using the design system. So you probably heard of Figma, obviously. How many of you use Figma on a day-to-day basis? Okay, so it's a good mix. How many of you use the Figma API? Okay, like 3 or 4. Okay, that's good. So the Figma API and the Figma team they built their tool with collaboration in mind, and they went even further and released this API so that they could open the design files to anyone. So with the possibilities of actually being able to from a programmatical way to kind of go inside your design files, other projects came along. So this is again John Gold kind of exploring this idea of querying your design file live. So this is Figma on the left side, and this is a custom tool that is kind of reading from what exists and what the designer is doing, and is creating like a linting based on the rules that they've set at Airbnb. So you can see that like it's highlighting some colors are wrong, etc. So this is kind of making a bridge between obviously having the restrictions of a design library that you can have in your design tool, but also having other tools that can help you maintaining that consistency across the different mediums. And they also have other tools for like copywriting and etc., which is quite interesting. But the Figma API isn't really accessible to people, to humans. So let's just go over like an example really quickly. So if we want to get all the text styles that are part of this design file here on the right, this is roughly the code that we would need to get there. So this is JavaScript for those that don't recognize. But you can tell from this, and you don't have to understand this, but you can tell from this that first you need to have some technical knowledge, obviously, and then you have to have some awareness of the file structure and where the components are placed and etc. to get and extract that information. So I was kind of thinking, maybe we can have something simpler, but maybe you can do something to help with this new tooling that starts to exist. So I went on a different direction. So instead, maybe we could have something like this. So this is much more readable. This is something that is more approachable, and it's easier for people to start looking into the design files without having that technical background. So does anyone know what language this is? GraphQL, exactly. As Mark again said, yeah, it took 5 years for React for the design tools to notice React. So he was wondering how many more it will take to notice GraphQL. But the reality is that you can actually use that today. So this is Figma GraphQL. It's a library that I've been developing for the past year or so. And this library was built with the mindset of making the design tools, and in this case Figma, more accessible to non-technical people, to have something that everyone could play around. So I'm actually not going to talk much more about this, but I did a talk just a few months ago in Berlin where you can watch it, and I have other examples there. So if you want to have a look at that, it's available in the internet. I have all the links at the end. Yes, I wanted to highlight something, because I think that at this point you're probably looking at me and saying, okay, so they've put another developer on stage telling about all the different things that designers need to learn and etc. But I think I share this opinion with Mark. I think, and I think that other people have mentioned this before throughout the day as well. I think designers are quite smart and can learn new things. And I actually think that we are missing a lot of the design input in building those tools, in building those processes. And I think it would be great for designers to kind of step away from the design tools and help with this entire process, because I think it's a really important point of view, obviously. And if you think about it, we've started designing, and this is not even that old, like we had tools even before that, but we started when the web was more kind of like this relationship between designers and developers was more static. We kind of had this tools like Illustrator, Photoshop, Fireworks in design if you are crazy, I don't know. It then evolved to a more component-based tooling. So we have Sketch, we have Figma, we have XD again. And this relationship is evolving as we are speaking. The past few years, as we've witnessed a tremendous shift in the ways of working. And I think that this new relationship between designers and developers need a separate tool, need different tools, so that we can kind of promote this relationship and make the improvements that we need in our processes. So I'm going to go quickly through a bunch of tools that are helping with this new relationship. So we have Interplay. Interplay helps you document your design system from the code perspective, but they also have a Figma plugin that uses the coded components as a source, so you can use those coded components inside your Figma files. And they are also launching a prototyping tool that helps creating those UIs based on the coding components, on the coded components as well. On the same note, you have Alva. So this is an open source tool that you can use to build prototypes based, again, on coded components. And you have UXPin that has been working on this merge tool that they are building to include, again, the coded components into the prototyping tool. So we have lots of prototyping tools appearing that are using the coded components that we can use to build our UIs. And UXPin also generates the documentation for us automatically. And obviously you have FramerX, who right now it's probably like when you think about animation and prototyping, right? Probably FramerX is the tool that comes to mind. And they are investing a lot in component-based animation, in including code into the tool. And it's been really interesting to understand this evolution of tooling as well. We also have different tools or different approaches to new tools. So this is BuilderX. I think it's very recent, but it's basically a design tool that helps you generate code for native, so mobile and web as well, in React. So these tools are taking a different approach, and very soon we'll be able to just be designing and producing code without having to have like a developer working with us. I'm not sure if that's good or not, but it's just something that we'll definitely have to see if it works for you. And on the same note, this is modules. So to me, this is one of the most exciting ones that are coming up. This is built specifically with design systems in mind. And with modules, you can specify your design system, you can prototype, and also it generates the documentation automatically for you. So all of these tools are kind of being developed, and this is not something that we can use today in kind of production mode, but I think this is very interesting to see what is coming up, and I think the next few years will be quite interesting in that aspect. So at this point, I was ready to finish my journey. I was ready to finish my talk as well. But I kept noticing something every time that I went to one of these websites. They all said something about being the source of truth, being like the one place that you have all the definitions for your design files, and etc. So it got me thinking that maybe the design systems, we could find a common language. We can find something that represented that source of truth. So we actually have a fourth chapter in this talk. So Robin wasn't like a visionary after all. But I'm going to talk about the design system in the concept of being the language. And we've seen today that each design system is its own language. So each company has their own design system. And you can understand this as a region of the world, a country of the world that has their own language. But like we have English, that is kind of like the lingua franca of the modern world, we can also maybe think about what's the English of our design systems. And even if it's just the second or the third language, as many of us here today, maybe there's something in common that we can find that can describe your design system. And that thing in common, I think, for me, would be a common format for the design systems. And when I say a common format, it's really a specification. You can think of it as like the PDF for design systems, because the PDF helps us change the way that we shared online our documents. So maybe there's something that we can do to kind of create this PDF format for design systems. Luckily, again, there's always someone asking the same questions on Twitter. I think in this case, I think it's quite important that we understand that all of these different tools, yes, they are working together, or like they were working in the same industry, in the same space, but I feel that we are not working together as an industry. So maybe there's something that we can do to have like a universal file format, as Davo is saying. And one of the replies is actually quite interesting, because they mentioned that this common denominator, or lowest common denominator format, which obviously, to his point, Elko is saying that the design tools can't be restricted or can't be constrained by one universal file format, but they can agree on a common denominator, on a lower common denominator. So we're going to see some approaches, and Sid mentioned this earlier this morning. We're going to see that some tools and some companies are already looking into this common specification. And some of them are taking more of kind of defining the design tokens, and that's what you can see with design system utils, with system UI, and style dictionary from Amazon as well. And this is something that it's kind of like the initial approach to this problem, because then there are other tools coming up. So this is DS. It's in the same line of like specifying your design tokens, but they want to be like the framework, the design framework, or the framework for the design systems. And I think this is quite interesting, because as you can see in the example, you have a lot of flexibility, a lot of possibilities to test your design system and to kind of roll this out to different platforms, different clients, and etc., with just changing a few parameters in your configurations. On the same line, but on the other spectrum, so Storybook has recently announced their component story format. And if you read their explanation about why they created this, it goes very in line with what I was just saying here, but they are focusing on the component side. And maybe there's something that we can actually do to not only focus on the components, but have other parts of the design system as well. Yeah, Airbnb obviously is working in this area for a lot of time, and they have the resources to explore lots of different things. And one of this is Lona, which we've seen here before. And the particular thing about Lona is that they are actually using a component, a dot component file format. So they have this notion of a common file format, and they built a tool. So the one that you can see here is a visualizer for that specific component file format. And they also built a compiler that generates coded components from that specification. You also have Avocode, so they released their SDK, and their goal is to have tools that provide any company that wants to build new design tools with resources that can help them read, parse, and visualize the different file formats in a common file format. And they created this octopus, which they call it as a universal design format. And this is interesting because we are seeing companies moving into this direction. And this is something that you can use today. This seems like a very solid product. So I wonder if more products are kind of going to start to adopt this new way of understanding a file format, of understanding a specification. I dream of a future where I can have my design system represented in a way where I can do I can define like the design tokens on Lona. I can use modules to generate my components. I can use Figma to just put quickly like some mockups. I can use Framer to build my prototyping tool, my prototypes, and I can use Zero Height to document everything. But the root of everything is still my design file, and that design system format is kind of publishing to every one of these tools, and all of those tools understand what that format means. And I don't think we're that far away from achieving it. Because I think the goal with design systems and the way that we integrate it in our organizations is that it becomes invisible to everyone. If everyone can be using our design system without knowing, I think that's a huge success to the design system implementation. And I think this common file format can help with that, because some of the exec team can just open a PowerPoint and it kind of understands the design system specification, and they can just generate a presentation with our branding or etc. So just think about that for a little bit. So I'm just finishing up my talk, and it's going to be like the last 2 minutes of this conference. So I'm just going to do some main takeaways from my talk. Use the documentation as the starting point. Don't think of it as the end goal of a design system. This is just a place to start the conversation, but you don't expect everyone to just go there, because they won't go there. In the same line, don't be afraid to start using code to improve the design process. The good thing about code is that it can act as a reality check, because once you have your design tools, you're in that protected environment, but once you go into code, you're actually seeing what your customers will see. So I think adding code to the design process will help you immensely being consistent and having that trust that you want from everyone that uses your design system. In that note, think about the people that are using the design systems. And it's not your customers, it's also like your developers, managers, designers. Think about them. Think about how they are they using the design system? How are they working? And try to be in that middle. Try to find places where you can actually kind of jump in and help them do their job better, because they will appreciate that. They will start using more the design system if they see that it's a big improvement for their workflow. And finally, make the design system open to everyone. And when I say this, I mean really open to everyone, in the sense that just let people find ways that you've never imagined that you could use the design system to achieve those goals. But I would go a little bit even further, and I would say that use design system as an excuse to make design open to everyone inside your organization. Design systems, and we've just mentioned that during the break, design systems are actually a very good excuse and a very good entry point or like entry door inside your organizations to start bringing design to the conversations around other parts of the business. So just use the design systems as an excuse to make design more open inside your organizations. So, as I've said, this is a talk that has lots of content, so you can go to that link, and I've tweeted it as well. It was an absolute pleasure to be here and closing the event as well. I wasn't expecting that at all, but I want to thank you all for being here. I hope that you enjoy this talk, and I'm sure that you've enjoyed the entire day. If you want to reach out, I'm Raposo at Twitter. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.